Welcome to Flashes of Insight. Today, around the world, we have people unable to gather in places of worship. And so what they're doing very often is picking up streamed masses or virtual celebrations. What's wrong with a virtual mass?
The notion of virtuality is that one can be physically separate from someone else and yet spiritually united with them. So, for instance, you guys are over in Oceania. It's late on Tuesday evening, but I'm here in the UK and it's early morning. But through this technology, we're present to one another. So that's great. But we already have that deep within our DNA as Christians, because we inherited from Judaism the notion that everyone who prayed together at the same time was virtually praying as one people. So whenever people looked at the eastern sky and they saw 3 stars, they knew this was the time the prayer was taking place in the temple. And by thinking of this, they were associated with the prayer in the temple. And we have a lovely story about that in the Christian scriptures, though not in the Jewish scriptures, in the story of Judith. And we've taken this notion of virtuality over immediately into the Christian church, in that early Christians thought that when they said the Our Father, wherever they were all praying as one people and one voice, because people didn't want to think of it as me and God. It was me have been made into an us, and it's us and God. And then we turned that into an even bigger liturgy called the Liturgy of the Hours. And indeed, every time people hear church bells, they now think it's a warning to try and get to church. But actually, the original purpose of church bells was, you can't get here, but you know we're going to pray. So if you hear the bell and you think about it, your prayer is joined together. So there's lots of things we can do virtually, but not everything. We know we can go and listen to a symphony virtually. We know we can have a meeting virtually, but we can't go down the pub for a pint with a mate virtually. We can't be close to the people we love virtually. And people here in lockdown, at least in this country, they're desperate to touch their loved ones, grandparents to touch their new grandchildren, partners that are being separated to touch one another. And we all know there's a hell of a difference between a meeting on Zoom and a quiet meal together with friends or loved ones when we can actually all be together. Now, the problem is we can have umpteen liturgies, which are virtual, and they're wonderful because they bring us together as a people in the presence of God. But the Eucharist is a very special type of gathering, and it's a type of gathering that demands that we're around a table. And it's not someone, just as I want to desire to be with my grandchild or with my loved one, I've actually got to want to be there with all the other people. And it's only when we are there together with all the other people that we can do the 2 central events that Jesus asked us to do when we praise the Father. And that is, we can share a loaf of bread together. We can do something terribly intimate and very countercultural and very hard for us to do even in the best of times. Drink a cup of wine, share a cup one to another. So just as there's a limit to virtuality in meetings, and it'll never take the place of meeting up with a loved one, so there's a limit to virtuality in liturgy, and the Eucharist marks that point. So let's be virtual and pray together, but let's not try and make out that the Eucharist is just one more bit of communication. The Eucharist is something far more real.
Any residences there in the Pacific at all, Carmel, in what Tom's saying?
I was going to start the question with something different and say what is right with a virtual mass. For our people are incredibly religious. Any Sunday, you walk down the street and there'll be people going to the Methodist Church, the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, young, old. The whole place is moving to Mass or moving to church. Our bishop set up virtual. He decided he would only have live stream Sunday Mass, and then he went to daily Mass because the demand was so great. It's a lifeline for our people. So to say that for us pastorally, without this, I think our people many of whom are unemployed now, we have 1/8 of the population, which includes children, unemployed, and people are now starting to feel very, very, very concerned. We're still in lockdown. We only have 3 people left. We've only ever had 18, and we only have 3 people left with the virus who are positive. But there is, it's a very strongly, it's a country that's run by its government, very much so. And what's happening is it's serving a need. However, I totally agree with Tom. We have missed a moment, I think, because we could be focusing on the presence of Christ in the liturgy of the word. But for us, because we have the Eucharist, one lady said, one of our sisters, the sisters where I live, saw one of the parishioners and said to her, "How are you? Oh, you must be sad to miss the Mass." "Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm not missing the Mass. I can watch the Mass on TV. I'm missing communion." So I think there is that whole sense of the Tridentine understanding of the Eucharist that's very clear here.
Mm-hmm. What about in New Zealand, Joe?
It's a mixed bag. So, for instance, in the parishes where I am, we moved ahead with live stream Mass from the Cathedral Presbytery. There were a group of 4 priests living there. So they did that every Sunday, and the numbers were 2,000 to 6,000 in terms of views. So about 2/3 of those probably stayed for the whole thing. A lot of people liked it because it was the lifeline and they saw it as being necessary, and they'd say, "Oh, it was just lovely going to Mass." And then others would say to me, one woman said, "The first time I watched it all the way through and I stood when I should. The second time I felt quite comfortable to knit. And by the third time, I decided I'd have coffee in the middle and I live paused it." So it was like, somehow in all of this, it's like, what the hell are we doing? Came to mind. And it seems to be both a security blanket in terms of this is a very familiar ritual which I can go to. Also, it's like it's a commodity. It was another thing that was online because everybody's lives suddenly went online. Everybody was communicating virtually. For me, though, there were a couple of problems with it. One was the environment. So that a virtual environment, as this one is, by its nature, is not interactive in the sense that we cannot all of us speak at the same time. If we wanted to recite the Our Father together now, it would be just noise. And so there is that whole thing in which the environment in which we celebrate the Eucharist is actually critical to its celebration. I think there is, and that performance element within Eucharist has been changed, or it's been underscored to be the performance of the priest. And so I think a lot of the guys that I know did this, they said Mass because they don't know what else to do. And in some places, priesthood has degenerated into simply being the person who says the mass. And so I wonder whether there's actually underneath all of this a much deeper reality of dealing with ritualized men, that their training is in ritualization, they're deeply ritualized. And so coming out of this again is interesting too, because what I'm seeing now is that their solution is more masses.
I think that's the question. I'd ask each of the three of you to just briefly say what you think will be the most enduring element out of this experience. What will people take from this experience of lockup into the next stage and phase of the evolution of the church? Why don't you start, Joe, because you began to talk about that.
Okay. I think the biggest evolution will be, what have the people prayed at home and how does that come into the Sunday Mass? And if it doesn't, what will be the price that is paid?
And Carmel?
One of the real positives out of this has been families have prayed very much together. And I think that they've also done a lot of gospel sharing together. So I think these are really important things. One thing that concerns me terribly is the fact that our people don't understand that they are needed as much at Mass as the priest is. And perhaps worrying me even more than that is the priest doesn't think the people are needed. So I think that whole issue of really exploring again what participation means.
Okay. And Tom, would you like to conclude?
I think we've realized that 50 years of catechesis of the Second Vatican Council has often been just on the surface, and people very quickly reverted, both priests and the people they were speaking to, reverted to the idea that Mass is something that priests do and other people just listen into. I think that's a serious negative. But the positive, I pick up what Carmel said, it's taught a lot of people that liturgy must be more than consuming something, and also that liturgy must be something that all of us do, led by a presider, rather than something that a presider does for us and then we just literally download.
Thank you to the three of you. We'll be back for more later. Thanks for being with us on Flashes of Insight.